be seated. Our lesson tonight comes from the Gospel of Mark, the 15th chapter. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "You say so." Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas was imprisoned with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to this custom. Then he answered them, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again. "Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." Pilate asked them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed Jesus over to be crucified. The word of the Lord. Gathered together by the power of the Holy Spirit, let us now confess our common faith in the words of the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God the Father, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son. He was conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit and born of the Virgin Mary.
Stop it! Stop it! All of you, sit down and shut up. Every time you Christians get together, you damn me, Pontius Pilate, for killing this master of yours. Sit down. My name is Pontius Pilate, governor of the Roman province of Syria, appointed by Tiberius Caesar, no less. I'd like to say a few words to you tonight in my defense. You Christians always have and are still doing it. You followers of Jesus Christ, you publicly condemn me every time you meet for worship, saying, as you were just about to say, he suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. How I hate that! Let me tell you, I'm a smart fellow. Very intelligent, hardworking, always at the top of my class in school. And yet, in my lifetime, I was never really important. Just a minor official in the whole bureaucracy of Rome. I was a small-town governor in the land of Judea, Judea being unimportant both in size and in importance. My only claim to fame was the one eventful day in my life that you know as Good Friday. Throughout my term, I had nothing but trouble for those Jews. Their odd religion. I hate Jews. Always have, always will. They cause me nothing but trouble. Those blasted Jews with their continually bickering and by their constant demands, as well as their cloak and dagger operations against my troops. They had in their ranks some men who, when they wore their long cloaks like they used to do, who kept daggers there, and they'd wait till a couple of my men were together alone, and they'd stick those daggers in their back, or they'd wait till some of my troops got drunk, and then they slit their throats. Sicarii, they were called, dagger carriers. and they carried out a very terrible guerrilla warfare against my troops. You know, there was always some trouble with those darn Jews. I wish I could have governed a more manageable province instead of being stuck out in the boonies like I was. I had a good education, and despite what any of you might think, I always considered myself to be a fair-minded man. But what frustrated me was that I was in that obscure little corner of the Roman Empire with such an insane and obstinate group of people. And I had been given orders by the Caesar himself to keep the peace. How in God's name can you keep the peace with those blasted Jews? And I recognized that the only way I was ever going to get out of there was to do a good job and get promoted. I had to keep the peace in order to do it. And how can you do that with people like the Jews? I will confess that it pleases my sense of irony to realize that, quite frankly, I now am the greatest Roman of them all. Today, some of my countrymen, like Augustus Caesar, Seneca, the great philosopher, Cicero, the writer, they've all been forgotten. Not me. Thanks to you crummy Christians, I'm still remembered. In fact, the Virgin Mary and I are the only humans mentioned in your creeds. She, of course, is revered and venerated in your creeds, but every Sunday, every Lord's Day you call it, millions of Christians the world over utter those damnable words, "He suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried." Friends, I pay a heavy price for what I did. Sometimes I wonder if this is not the ultimate paradox of history for me. An insignificant bureaucrat in this backwater 2-bit province of Judea, to suddenly find myself face to face with someone who was more important than me, someone I condemned to death, a person with whom I had nothing to do in life, but now I'm eternally linked in death. How would you feel if day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, century after century, your name was linked with the greatest crime in history? Let me tell you about that Friday morning. You call it Good Friday. I want to tell you as I saw it from my judgment seat. As governor, I was chief judge and jury, sort of the court of last resort in all major trials. And you know from your study, your high school study of Roman history, that whenever our country took over another country, we made it one of our provinces. And we let the people in that province do pretty much what they wanted, provided that they paid taxes on time and that they kept the peace. That's all that was required of them, taxes and peace. One additional thing, we did retain the right to review and make decisions of any capital crime. That means a crime that carries with it the death sentence. That was just a matter of good administration, and it usually involved nothing more than stamping the court's decision. And after all, that wasn't too important, simply because only a few lives were involved, and after all, what's a few lives here and there? Life was boring for me as governor. There was no social life for me, or for my highborn wife among those stupid Jews. The only thing they were a constant source of irritation. And on that day, that Friday, there was something in the air. You could feel it. You could feel it. And it wasn't that the city was overrun with a group of pilgrims from all over the known world who would come to their temple to celebrate the high festival days of Passover. My chief of staff wakened me early that morning. He told me that a mob of high-ranking Jews was gathered outside, and they wanted me to officiate at some kind of trial. I got dressed, went out to see what the trouble was. Those darn Jews, with them it was always something. At first I couldn't figure it out. They had arrested a man who they said was a troublemaker, and it was obvious that they wanted to kill him. But they couldn't kill him without my permission. Right away I knew that something was up, really odd, for those Jews to be so concerned about our Roman law, which they hated so much. You know, you folks have a saying that you can judge a man by his friends. The opposite is true, I've discovered. You can also judge a man by his enemies. And in this instance, his enemies were my enemies. I was instinctively drawn to this Jesus because the right people were against him. I felt sorry for the man. He'd already been badly treated. My experience as governor made me a fairly shrewd judge of human nature, and it was obvious to me that this man Jesus was no troublemaker. After meeting with him, I didn't find him guilty of anything, much less anything deserving the death penalty. He certainly wasn't a threat of any kind. But when I told that mob of Jews that I was going to have him flogged and let go, did they ever raise a howl? Crucify him, they yelled. I knew right away we were in for trouble because he was up against the worst kind of prejudice there is, religious prejudice. You folks in this century know a great deal about religious prejudice, hatred, and extremism. Then an amazing thing happened. I asked this Jesus, somewhat sarcastically, I admit. I asked him, "Are you a king like they say you are?" And I expected a yes or no answer. But just like those darn Jews are still doing, he answered me with a question. A question is asked and another question is asked. I hate that. He took the trial completely out of my hands. He asked me, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others tell you about me?" What did he think I was, an idiot? Anyway, I got really angry and I said to him, "Your own people have handed you over to me. What have you done?" At first he didn't answer me, and there was this long, uncomfortable pause. And just about the time I was ready to ask him another question, he said, "Yes, I am a king. My kingdom is not of this world." What an answer. And then he went on to say that if he wanted to, he could call down angels from heaven who would come and protect him. I knew right away he was either hallucinating or insane. The whole thing was becoming ludicrous. I said, half joking, "So, you are a king." And before I could say anything else, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You said it. I am a king. For this reason I came into the world to testify to the truth." And it suddenly dawned on me. He was on the offense, not the defense. I was stunned. That peasant Jew I initially felt sorry for, in a few brief moments had literally turned the tables on me. Instead of him trying me, he was trying me instead of me trying him. And so I said to him in response, the only thing I could think of, "What is truth?" As much as he angered me, I knew that he wasn't guilty of the charges leveled against him by that crazy mob. I really did try to exonerate him, but the more I did, the more they screamed out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Suddenly, a servant put a note in my hand. It was from my wife. She had been doing poorly. She was not happy in our assignment. And in her note, she said that she had had bad dreams all night about the very man who was standing before me. And she warned me in the note, "Be careful, who I love, be careful of that man. That man is trouble." And Lord only knew he was. So I appealed to their human pity. I told the guard to lash him. And when he was good and bloody, I said to the crowd, "Listen, you idiots, do you want me to crucify your king?" And you know what they did? They cried out, "We have no king but Caesar." Next to me, Caesar was the person they hated most. And here they are claiming Caesar as their king. Things were rapidly getting out of hand. I was losing control. I was seriously thinking about calling out some of my troops and dispersing the crowd and putting this man under protective custody. But then I noticed that devil Caiaphas, the high priest. What a devil of a man. That wily old, I won't even say it in church. He knew he had me cornered. Do you know what he did? He came up to me and bowed and said, "Sir, if you let this man go, we'll revolt. We'll start a riot. And you, good buddy, will lose your job for not keeping the peace." You folks look condemningly at me tonight, but my career was on the line. My future was at stake. The only way I was ever going to get a better assignment was to keep the peace. And so, in defeat, I called for a basin of water, and I literally washed my hands of the whole bloody mess, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood." And when I said that, those bloodthirsty wretches cried out, "Let his blood be on us and upon our children." You think I copped out, right? That I put my own interest, my own neck, ahead of doing the right thing. Well, pardon me, but many of you have done Jesus Christ in for far less than I did. And unlike you church members, I never promised to honor, serve, love, and obey this Jesus Christ as you have done, only repeatedly to break those vows as some of you have. So you can sit there smugly tonight and throw stones at me if you want for what I did, but just make sure your own hands are clean. Any of you interested in knowing what happened to me after that fateful day in history, that Good Friday, when I encountered Jesus Christ? Those Jews took Jesus out and crucified him. That was on Friday. After he died, things calmed down a little bit. And then on Saturday, things were quiet. But then on Sunday, there was some kind of excitement over the rumor that he had risen from the dead. I didn't believe it. I don't believe it. I'm a practical man. When you're dead, you're dead. You don't come back to life. I stayed there as procurator in Judea, as governor. I stayed there for a few more years. And then the very thing I dreaded most happened. I was recalled to Rome, and instead of getting the promotion I deserved, I was judged incompetent. Me, Pontius Pilate, incompetent. Instead of being promoted and being given a better province to govern, I was exiled, would you believe, to Gaul. What a reward for serving Rome so faithfully in all those years in such a God-forsaken place. In exile, I became despondent. I brooded over all the events of my life. I finally decided that I couldn't take it any longer. You folks in this century have a saying that you're going to jump off a bridge. I jumped off a cliff to end my torment. So many legends have grown up about me over the years. The only legend that's somewhat credible is the one still held by Swiss peasants who report that on stormy nights, when the thunder and the lightning play over the mountain that is named in my honor, Mount Pilatus, they say that they can see my ghost washing my hands over and over, washing my hands. I'm sure that your poet Shakespeare was thinking of me when he has Lady Macbeth, you remember, the murderess, washing her hands over and over again to rid herself of the stain of blood, saying, out, out, damn spot, out, I say. Here's the smell of blood still, and all the perfumes of Arabia cannot erase that smell of blood. I know well what she means. I no longer have any desire to defend myself or my actions. Killing myself was the only way I could purge myself of this man's innocent blood. And even that didn't help. I'm still the most despised person in history, and it's you Christians. You're the problem. You're the ones who condemn me every time you have a chance. I tell you the truth. I feel very close to you modern people. Since I was raised in the religion of Rome, I was pretty much of an agnostic, not knowing exactly what I believed, like some of you. What is truth, I asked, and thought there was no such thing as real truth. Things were all mixed up in my world, just as they are in your world today. No one knew what to believe. I see all of this in your time and in you, and I feel very modern. I feel very sad. Your age has nothing mine didn't. Same mistakes are still being made. Same spiritual blindness prevails. People like you still prevail in their sins. No, the world hasn't changed much. For a long time after that eventful Friday morning, when my life was so irrevocably changed, I didn't sleep well. And then I remember talking to a man who told me about something some of those old Jewish prophets said. Words that they said applied to this man Jesus, the man I condemned to death. And those words made me think about what I had done. You've all heard them before. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and as one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. Yet he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities, and upon him was the chastisement that made us whole. And with his stripes we are healed. Oh God, if you exist, can you forgive me?